between the president and the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos. Sources telling CNN that the president at one point wasn't happy earlier today about a report he saw regarding the online retail giant. Amazon then clarifying their plans.
On Amazon, in this report that Amazon might start listing the additional cost on specific items put in place by the tariffs, the president is clearly angry. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said she had spoken to him about it this morning.
Had one statement come out from an Amazon spokesperson that essentially said, quote, it was never a consideration for the Man Amazon site and nothing had been implemented on Amazon properties.
I will take this since I just got off the phone with the president about Amazon's announcement. This is a hostile and political act by Amazon. Why didn't Amazon do this when the Biden administration hiked inflation to the highest level in 40 years?
The quiet storm just turned into a hurricane. In April 2025, President Trump unleashed a trade shock the world never saw coming, a blanket 10% tariff on all imports, and a crushing 145% levy on Chinese goods. Overnight, decades of finely tuned supply chains collapsed. And at the center of the chaos? Amazon, the company that powers nearly 40% of America's e-commerce. Within weeks, the fallout was brutal. Electronics, appliances, even everyday essentials, prices began to surge. Amazon's Asia-heavy network, once its greatest strength, suddenly became its biggest liability. Forced into survival mode, the retail giant made a $13 billion decision that would change global trade forever. Because Amazon didn't just adjust, it walked away. And what happened next will reshape economies from Los Angeles to Hanoi. Before we dive into this unraveling, make sure to like, subscribe, and keep watching. You'll want to hear every detail. The tariffs weren't just numbers on a policy sheet. They were a wrecking ball swung directly into the heart of global commerce. Trump's 10% baseline tariff hit everything coming into America. Steel from Canada, electronics from South Korea, clothing from Bangladesh. Nothing was spared. And then came the hammer blow, a 145% tariff on Chinese goods. Overnight, the U.S. government wasn't just targeting China, it was detonating the supply chains that kept America's shelves stocked and its consumers spending. For Amazon, this was existential. The company had spent decades building its empire on cheap, reliable production out of Asia. Phones, laptops, routers, televisions, the electronics category alone relied overwhelmingly on Chinese and Southeast Asian manufacturers. With tariffs now inflating costs by 25% or more, Amazon faced a choice: bleed billions or pivot instantly. The numbers were staggering. Internal reports showed that if Amazon stayed locked into China, it would swallow nearly $7 billion in added costs within a single year. That's before factoring in shipping, warehousing, and the inflation ripple effect hitting suppliers upstream. The empire Jeff Bezos built wasn't just under stress, it was on the verge of collapse. So the company pulled the trigger. A $13 billion restructuring executed in weeks, not years. Contracts with Chinese factories were slashed. Procurement teams scrambled to lock in alternative partners in Mexico, Vietnam, and India. Flights that once touched down in Shenzhen now rerouted to Monterey, Ho Chi Minh City, and Bengaluru. It was one of the fastest, most dramatic corporate pivots in history. Mexico emerged as the early winner. Its proximity to the U.S., combined with existing free trade agreements, made it the logical first step. Amazon poured investment into new distribution hubs in Monterey and Tijuana. Logistics volumes surged 33% in a matter of months. Truck convoys that once hauled goods from the California coast were now rolling straight across the southern border. Vietnam, too, seized its moment. Already a rising player in textiles and light electronics, it suddenly found itself flooded with orders. Small manufacturing zones outside Hanoi expanded almost overnight. Double-digit growth was logged quarter after quarter as factories worked around the clock to replace lost Chinese capacity.
But perhaps the biggest long-term winner was India. Amazon's restructuring poured money into its suppliers across Bangalore, Chennai, and Hyderabad. The move wasn't just about low-cost textiles, it was about tapping India's emerging tech sector, its precision electronics, and its growing middle-class workforce. For the first time, India was being treated not as a secondary backup, but as a critical anchor in global supply. Meanwhile, inside the US, the story was very different. At ports like Los Angeles and Long Beach, container traffic fell off a cliff, 20% fewer ships docked by midsummer. Thousands of longshoremen, warehouse workers, and truckers suddenly faced layoffs. Local businesses that depended on the constant churn of goods felt the squeeze. What was supposed to be a patriotic tariff to bring jobs back home was instead bleeding jobs from America's busiest ports. And it didn't stop there. Retail giants like Walmart, Target, and Home Depot watched with growing panic. If Amazon, with its AI-driven logistics and ruthless efficiency, was taking a hit this severe, what chance did they have? Reports showed early warnings of 10 to 20% price hikes across entire categories by 2026. Lumber, clothing, electronics, even groceries tied to foreign packaging costs. All of it was set to rise. Consumers hadn't yet felt the full brunt, but the storm clouds were forming. A family buying school laptops would soon pay $200 more per device. A contractor outfitting a worksite would see tools and materials eat up thousands in unexpected costs. The promise that tariffs would protect American families was already unraveling, and it had only just begun. But this was only the opening act, because while Amazon was rewriting its supply chains, the ripple effects were rewriting the global balance of power. And what happened next would send shockwaves far beyond America's borders. The real twist in this saga wasn't just Amazon's $13 billion pivot, it was the unintended winners. Because the moment the US slammed the door with tariffs, emerging economies threw it wide open. Mexico, India, and Vietnam didn't just gain contracts, they gained leverage. For the first time in decades, global supply chains weren't defined in Beijing or Washington, but in Monterey, Hanoi, and Bengaluru. Mexico's rise was immediate. Its warehouses in Tijuana and Monterrey weren't just buzzing with activity, they were overflowing. Logistics networks grew by 33%, creating thousands of jobs. Local trucking fleets expanded, highways clogged with new shipments, and regional GDP forecasts jumped. What was meant to reshore manufacturing to Ohio or Michigan ended up fueling an industrial boom south of the border. Vietnam saw a similar transformation. The country, once dismissed as a small player, suddenly became indispensable. By late 2025, Vietnamese exports to the US had surged double digits, with entire new industrial parks springing up outside Ho Chi Minh City. Electronics firms that once fought for scraps in China's shadow were now front and center, shipping directly to Amazon's US distribution centers. For Washington, the irony was sharp. Tariffs meant to cripple Asia instead turbocharged one of its fastest-growing economies.
And then there was India, the long game. Unlike Mexico or Vietnam, India wasn't just about cheap labor. It was about scale. With its vast pool of engineers, its expanding tech hubs, and a government eager to court foreign investment, India positioned itself as Amazon's future backbone. New contracts poured into textile plants in Chennai, semiconductor facilities in Hyderabad, and e-commerce support centers in Bengaluru. By mid-2026, India's trade volume with Amazon alone was projected to eclipse $5 billion annually. Meanwhile, America's trade arteries began to dry up. Los Angeles and Long Beach, once the beating heart of U.S. imports, were ghost towns compared to the pre-tariff boom. Cargo ships bypassed California for Mexican ports, rerouting goods through Central America before crossing the border. Local businesses, the diners, repair shops, and logistics firms that thrived off port activity faced mass closures. Economists warned of 20,000 direct and indirect job losses in California alone. The consumer hit came next. By late 2025, ordinary families were already paying more for basics. Laptops surged by 20%, appliances crept higher, furniture from Asia was marked up nearly 15%. And behind every percentage point, there was a story. A single mom now forced to stretch her paycheck thinner, a contractor shelving plans to expand his business, a college student priced out of a new phone. Retailers too felt the squeeze. Walmart quietly announced price adjustments on imported goods. Target followed. Home Depot raised warnings of inevitable increases in tools, fixtures, and construction materials. Even grocery chains tied to foreign packaging saw their costs climb. The tariffs didn't just raise prices, they rewrote consumer expectations. Shoppers accustomed to Amazon's always cheaper, always faster promise suddenly faced delays, shortages, and bills that climbed hundreds, sometimes thousands higher. Globally, the fallout was even more dramatic. China, once the giant supplier to America's shelves, wasn't broken by the tariffs. It diversified. Factories shifted their exports toward Europe, Southeast Asia, and Africa. Within months, Beijing had signed new agreements with ASEAN partners, quietly securing markets the U.S. had abandoned. By the end of 2026, analysts predicted the U.S. global import share could fall by 1/5, a historic decline. And while Washington spun the tariffs as tough love to force manufacturing back home, the numbers told a colder story. U.S. factories didn't roar back to life. The promised wave of jobs in Michigan and Ohio never materialized. Instead, automation and robotics absorbed what little production was reshored, leaving workers sidelined. The very policy designed to protect American jobs had accelerated the march of machines. And Amazon, meanwhile, adapted with cold efficiency. Its AI-driven logistics platform was retrained to manage the new routes. Algorithms recalculated shipping times, optimized truck convoys, and balanced costs across 3 continents. The system survived, but survival came at a price. Delivery stayed on track, yet the savings were gone. Consumers, not corporations, bore the brunt of the tariff experiment. And that's the paradox. Tariffs meant to protect America instead fueled growth overseas, hollowed out U.S. ports, raised consumer prices, and fractured the very foundation of global trade. So here we are. Trump's tariffs were sold as a shield for American workers, but the reality, they became a weapon against America itself. Amazon's $13 billion pivot didn't just expose the cracks in U.S. policy, it redrew the map of global trade. Mexico gained factories, Vietnam gained markets, India gained a future. And the United States, it got higher prices, hollowed out ports, and a shrinking share of global imports. This isn't just an Amazon story, it's a warning that protectionism, once unleashed, doesn't protect. It shifts power, jobs, and influence to whoever adapts fastest. And if America keeps swinging the tariff hammer, it won't be China that pays the price. It'll be ordinary families paying hundreds, even thousands more every year. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, hit like, tap subscribe, and stay tuned because the trade war is just getting started.